Hi gang, Mr. W here. I wanted to give you a brief overview video of the sample program I've included in your resources for assisting you in writing your program for this week. To start with, here we have the actual HTML page or the code for the HTML page. The web page that's produced by this code is just this little bit here. There's not much content on this page, and I'm only showing the content itself that only takes up just a little bit in the upper left-hand corner of a web page. Okay, and that is all built by this part of the web page, as we've already learned that the content for a web page is built between the body tags and an HTML and the HTML code. And it's also, as we've learned now at this point, is that we're putting our JavaScript programming code in between the head tags at in the first part of the page. Okay, now we've had a look at the overall view of this. Let's take a look at the programming in a more broken down fashion, detailed fashion. Here on this screen, I've taken the code, the HTML code that builds the interface here, and put it up here so we can talk about it aside, and place the program down here so that we can begin to talk about how it works with the actual interface. Okay. First off, let's talk about the interface and the actual HTML code that built the interface. You'll note, as we did last week, we have our text boxes. The code for the text boxes have been placed between two form tags. In your previous work, you also had those placed in a footer, and you will this week too. It'll continue to be in the footer of your web page. However, placing it between the forms, because placing the boxes between the form tags creates a special document here, or you could call this an object called a form, and gives the JavaScript different code that allows it to read from certain boxes and write into others. And I'll show you that in more detail in just a moment. First off, let's talk about because I'll assume that you all know, you can read through this code and understand how it puts this information into the form. Although we will talk about some of the different attributes in more detail further in this overview. Let's talk about the program just a little bit. This section of the program here is where we declare our variables and assign the data types. We could declare our variables within the actual program, the program that runs and executes, which is down in this part of the program. However, it's good programming practice to go ahead and declare your variables and give them their data types in the head of the program. So this would be considered sort of like the head of the program, if you will. And what we're saying here, I guess from our reading, you should already know that this declares, with this var code, it declares this variable called n1 as a variable, and we're also going to assign this variable n1 to be a numeric data type. That's the same with variable n2 and variable prod. All of these are going to be numeric data types, and by assigning them using the equal sign and assigning them to values of 0, it's a number. We could have put any number there we wanted to, but we use 0 to tell us that this is sort of a non-used variable at this time, and that it's a numeric data type. Okay, that's what we're doing with this head section. And of course the rest of this is going to be run when we click the multiply button, as you'll see in the next slide. This slide shows that when we do trigger the multiply button, we click on this, that this action begins. The action begins that's inside this function, and we're going to process this function. This function has a very simple process. It's going to read what is in these two boxes, it's going to read the values of those two boxes, and we're going to equate the values in those two boxes to our variables n1 and n2, multiply them together, and the result will be assigned to the value under the variable prod here, as you recall. Okay, and then we're going to write the value of prod into the last box here. Okay, show you in a moment how that's going to work. Okay, but the main thing we need to know is that through this function value, that's what's going to happen when we click the button. Now, why does that happen? Let's go up and look at our HTML code and we'll see why. Here you'll see an attribute that's called onClick. That means when we click the button, we're going to execute the function. In this case, the name of the function is product. The reason there are a couple of parentheses following that is, in some cases, we need to pass a value of some sort of a variable or attribute into the function, and that's where that value would go. In this case, we're not passing anything into the function because we're reading the values with code within the function, which are these two lines. Okay, and let's talk about those. Now, this is really the quote-unquote magic of what happens. This is the part, at least for me, was one of the hardest things to understand as I was learning this, and is how do I get information that are in these boxes, how do I get that from here to here, and how do I actually end up getting the result from here to here? Well, here's how it happens. Recall these form tags again. Well, the form tags created, what they did was they made all of the code in here which built these different text boxes and the button, and put the button on the page. All of this became more or less an object, a calculator, if you will. And in doing so, it allowed us to take advantage of some statements that are built through what we call, this is a document object, and through the document object that we created, we're able to use a couple of statements, or these statements are actually based on methods, which are little mini programs in themselves. At any rate, you don't need to understand what's inside those little programs. All you need to know is that this particular statement is used twice, is to read with, and if you'll excuse my sort of rudimentary writing here with a mouse, but these two statements read what's in those boxes, and it does it by get element by ID. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is whatever is in this box that I just showed you here, we're calling it or giving it an ID or identification of number 1 by what we did up here in our code line for the text box. Same for the second box. It's going to be called number 2. And if you'll look at this, you'll see that in this particular line, this says get element by ID. The ID is number 1, which is this, which was this. And it says get the ID number 1, but because it says dot value, that means grab the value that's in the box, whether it's a 10, a 25, whatever, and assign that value to N1. That means that it's going to read whatever is in here becomes N1. Same with N2. Okay? So it read, I don't know what happened to my reading here. Oh, I know what happened. For some reason we've just jumped. Pardon me. I'm going to go back to here. It's the same code and all of that. Let me redraw these lines again. And one, and 2. Okay, and we'll make the calculation. That's the next step. Now the variable prod has the result of the calculation and the multiplication, and we're going to use this last line. Let me move or remove one of these lines here because I drew through there, pardon me. And we're going to take the value of prod, which was the value that came from the calculation, and using this line here, we're going to write, this line means write, that value, because we said value here, into here. Now, how did that happen? What is the connection? Well, let's look up here at our last line for this text box. We gave the text box a name of prod, and that is the connection between this box and this particular statement here. Okay? So that's how we read. Again, this is a very simple program. Read the numbers in these boxes, make this calculation, and write the result into this box. And that's all there is to it. But the magic of it is, because we've given these attribute names of N1, number 1, number 2, prod to the text boxes, we can now use those in these document object method calls, and we will read and then write those back into there. So I hope this helps you with that and understanding to make sure that they're in. I'm giving you the code for these lines, for these particular lines here, and the write. I've given you the code exactly for the read and the write material that you need. You'll just need to figure out, make sure that you've got the right IDs and make sure you got the right IDs and the statements and the right name in the statement. And that way everything will work fine as far as the reading and the writing of your data from your interface element. We're going to learn a little bit more about using other input elements, particularly in our final project. Good luck.